speaker is Hilmar Lapp. He is going to talk us about towards ubiquitous or OWL computing, simplifying programmatic authoring of and querying OWL axiom.
Thanks, Raul, for the intro. Before I launch into the talk, I was just going to quickly point out that while I'm the presenter here, almost all of the work really has been done by Jim Balhoff, who's a programmer working at NIST, where I'm from, the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center, and also for Phenoscape. Data integration has been very prominent in bioinformatics from pretty much the early stages on. There's lots of data we all know in bioinformatics that we need to combine and that is worthwhile combining, that has a lot of power when combined to obtain new insights and so on and so forth. And while the different ways to integrate data, RDF has been shown to be a particularly powerful one. And there's been many papers, meanwhile, as to what insights can be obtained, both in neuroinformatics, for example, drug target validation, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to really try to make a more convincing case here. I'm going to assume we're more or less on board with that. Also, descriptive data, although there's a lot of talk with data mining and data crunching when the data is numeric, descriptive data, and I think there's a fair amount of awareness here in this room, is actually very prominent in biology as well, particularly in biology. Lots of observations are described in natural language using the full expressivity of natural language, such as gene function, phenotypes, traits, habitats, and so on and so forth. And so it's a real challenge to integrate descriptive observations across fields, across studies, and so on and so forth, due to the problems all inherent in free text and natural language, such as homonymy, synonymy, and so on and so forth. And so ontologies, again, have been shown to be particularly powerful at making semantics that's buried in free text amenable to essentially computational data mining. And so even to the extent that you can actually quantify the semantic difference or distance between different free text descriptions, right? And that has been shown to be really powerful and to be usable for biologic discovery in a sort of translational bioinformatics sense, if you will, where you can use insights obtained from or observations made on model organisms to inform human biology and human health. And so what we're doing in the Phenoscape project, which was kind of where I'm coming from with this talk, is we're essentially taking that same approach that's been used to connect model organism biology as far as phenotypes concerned with human biology as far as disease phenotypes and so on and so forth are concerned. We take that same approach and instead connect phenotype observations from model organisms with the natural diversity of phenotypes in the biodiversity of life. And ultimately with the goal, for example, there are other applications of this, but one of the applications, for example, is to underpin the causes of diversification with with genes and how these genes evolved. And so just broadly, just to give you a little bit of an overview, I'm not going to dwell too much on that in order to have time left for showing what the tools actually do that that I was talking about in the abstract. And so just broadly, we're integrating these data from different sources, comparative phylogenetic studies and phenotype observations from that end with phenotypes observed for model organisms that have genetic perturbations experimentally, like gene knockout experiments and so on and so forth. And so the way this works internally is we translate all these we transform all these phenotype observations into a common representation that's based formally in first-order logic and uses all ontologies and all class expressions that a reasoner can then put together and reason over and crunch through, if you will. Again, I'm going to dwell on this, just wanted to give you a kind of a a high-level picture of where we're coming from this. And so in order to make all, it's actually very challenging to make all this work because the ontologies that we use are very expressive, contain lots of classes that are defined in very expressive ways with many class expressions, property restrictions, and so on and so forth. And so it really challenged the scalability of all of these tools, the common reasoners, and so on and so forth, in even triple stores. And so we have a whole pipeline here. I thought I had a pointer here, but maybe now I don't.
Use the mouse.
Use the mouse. Yeah, so I have, it's in this gray box, you see we have a whole pipeline here that takes apart the different data sources and among other things, generates axioms that weren't in the ontology, but that can be essentially reflect what we know about biology other than what's already asserted in the ontology. And so one of these, just to give an example for how that's becoming challenging, is one of the things that we do here, and that's described in a paper that's presented, I believe, at about this time, or at least around this session, over in the phenotype session, a phenotype day session that runs with the biontologies SIG, is what assertions can we make about the relationships between properties and other things that represent what we know about how the presence of one structure in an organism implies the presence of another, and how the absence of one thing implies the absence of another. And so one thing is, for example, if we know that the anatomy ontology asserts that certain structures developmentally derive from others, and so if we know, if we've observed that the developmental precursor is absent, we know that the structure has to be absent as well. Right, and so if you want to phrase this in a more formal way, this gets pretty complicated, and if you wanted to assert this for all anatomical structures in the ontology, that would be even manually or in a sort of semi-scripted way, it'd be very laborious, and so we've built this tool that's called Scowl. That essentially tries to marry the power of a programming language with an ontology language. And so all this here that, if you were to carry it out sort of manually, all this boils down to is this snippet of code. That's not the full piece of code, right? There's a section that comes before that will actually define what term is, and so on and so forth, and import statements, blah blah blah, right? But the meat here of making this happen is here, right? And not only is it not long, it's also, I think, if you just look at it, not knowing Scala and not knowing very much about ontologies, this is probably somewhat clear as to what's happening here, right? And so this snippet right down here is, in fact, pretty much all Manchester syntax, which is a standard format for expressing all class expressions. So that's one advantage that it has. So just generally, let me just briefly on a high level say how this works. So Scowl, the tool itself, allows us the declarative approach that I showed you an example for in the previous slide to composing all expressions. It's implemented in Scala as a library, and the way this really works, why this works, even though it doesn't really look like a programmatic instruction, the way this works is Scala has this implicit class construct, and that decorates, if you will, classes, other classes, and so it's really the compiler that handles, and this works not only on class expressions, which is an example that I showed you before, but also on property axioms, subproperty axioms, like here, when the little O is the symbol in the old Manchester syntax for chaining properties, right? And so it's the compiler that will turn this into a much longer expression, right? Another application of this tool could be, it's not exactly what we've used it before, but what a very known problem is in authoring ontology axioms is when you do this on a collaborative basis, and hence want to version control how your ontology changes based on that, there's a real problem with commonly used ontology serialization formats. So the ones that there are formats that are essentially not human readable, even though they're text formats, that just don't really scale at all with the amount of ontology change, or that scale pretty well, I should say. And the one format that is kind of, a little bit human readable scales not at all. And so this kind of declarative way of constructing an ontology could be an approach to other ontologies on a larger scale in a more graceful way, if you will, right? And so there's actually a similar project called Tawny Owl by Phil Lord that I'm going to just give a shout out here that's absolutely worth looking to for those in the room who are actually interested in this kind of stuff. And so there's home on GitHub. Let me just move on here to the other tool. And so the other tool, the problem that tries to address is that using ontology, using the expressive power of ontologies in SPARQL can get pretty hairy and pretty difficult and pretty awkward. So what SPARQL is the query language for RDF. So when you put RDF data from an RDF together in a triple store, and then subsequently want to query it, what you use is SPARQL. SPARQL is for RDF, what SQL is for relational data, right, in essence. And so SPARQL is, though, very impoverished in terms of semantics, right? And so if you wanted to ask a question like genes, give me all the genes that are expressed in head muscles, right? Where the real ontology semantics in here is what's a head muscle, right? It's A, it's of type muscle, right? And B, it's part of something in the head, right? And so this doesn't seem very long, but it's already, it's already 4 lines. It's already somewhat difficult to figure out by a quick glance what's actually going on here. You can imagine that this is going to get awkward if you increase the complexity in this expression only very slightly even. And also, it's actually slow to execute. This is slow. Even for very powerful triple stores, and it's error prone. So as it stands here, this is not even correct, right? And which probably is difficult to see that it's actually not correct because it doesn't properly take into account the transitive property of the part of relation. And so we have many more complex use cases for this than the one I just showed you. And what the thing here is, even though RDF triple stores have actually a lot of trouble with this, and all reasoners do not. They can answer these kinds of questions very quickly and efficiently. And so what we've built is this tool that's called Owlet, a little owl in SPARQL that takes in SPARQL queries and interprets the class expressions embedded within them. And so what it really does is it allows you to put in a SPARQL query like this one, where you just say the structure here should be a subclass of any muscle that's part of the head, right? And so it's going to take this in and then expand this into a filter statement that enumerates all the structures that are a muscle and are part of the head. Right, and even though this list may get very long, surprisingly enough, it's actually much faster in performance and execution speed than the previous one is. So yeah, just quick summary. It's also implemented Scowl. It can be easily used in Java. It's on GitHub, MIT licensed, and I'm just going to, in the interest of time, skip the comparison here. There's one other tool that we've created, which is sort of a further next step generalization, if you will, of Owlet. This is called Owlery, that puts a web service in front of it. And why that matters is that now you can actually add this to your SPARQL queries more directly using the service keyword. This is the keyword that allows SPARQL, and it's a very, very powerful feature of SPARQL and RDF in particular, to federate queries across many different query endpoints, right? Something that we've always wished for SQL databases, but never quite got. So in summary, OWL is very powerful, ontologies are very powerful, and ontologies in RDF are very powerful, but programming computing with OWL is still a lot more complicated than it really needs to be, okay? And so in order to really have a system where, you know, or you have an environment where programming with ontologies would be as widespread and as easy and as ubiquitous as we program these days with alignments, right? There's nobody here who programs alignments by hand anymore, right? You use tools, you use libraries, and so on and so forth, right? Eventually, that's about the same point I think we should get to with computing with ontologies and with OWL in particular, right? And so what's needed is really a thriving ecosystem of these small tools that fill these various gaps and holes, right, that are needed to put things better together. And so the tools that I've spoken to you about fill only very few holes, but it's kind of a step, you know, it's a small step, but it's a step towards that direction, which is why I wanted to highlight them here. Thank you.
Questions?
Sometimes I think you're telepathic. I've just been thinking about this kind of thing. So are there any advantages in the Scala implementation? Does it allow access from other languages than Scala?
So Scala gets compiled into something that runs on the JVM. So it runs very seamlessly with Java. I believe you can also call through other languages that will be compiled into the JVM, such as Clojure, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Yeah, you'd have to ask Jim. You know Jim Baloff?
I'll ask him.
Okay, yeah.
I have a question. Which is the preferred pattern to use this kind of tool? I mean, it's better to put this tool in front of a SPARQL, process the OWL query, and then pass through the...
Yeah, so that's how OWLet works right now. You know, OWLet in a way masquerades right now as a SPARQL endpoint. It's not really, it masquerades as one. So it takes in the query, you know, masquerading as a SPARQL endpoint, and then, you know, picks out the All-Manchester class expression, expands it, and then passes it on to the real SPARQL endpoint, right? What this Owlery will enable you is not having to have that, but, you know, it allows you to have these a box, or, you know, scale it up horizontally, right? If you need more reasoners, which will not be uncommon, right? And then have a real SPARQL endpoint front that, and federate out to those reasoners, if you will, through those service keyword.
Thank you, Hilmar.
There's one more question,
one more?
if there's time.
One more. James, to the mic.
So have you done a comparison of extending a large sort of transitive query using SPARQL, using the asterisks in SPARQL, for instance, as opposed to a very long re-injected filter query? Have you done that sort of comparison?
Yes,
to see
we have.
What that looks
Yes.
like? Is it better to do the filter or the...
So performance-wise, interestingly, it's much more performant to use the filter expansion. It's perhaps a little unexpected, a little counterintuitive, but that's what we found. You know, and those weren't like, you know, your small, you know, not really scalable triple source. Were like, you know, big data, for example, which is triple source built for really huge applications.